Justin, what does being a great session player mean to you?
A great session player has a foot in the world of being an artist. Like, you're making music, you're creating something, right? But you also have a foot in the service industry, which means you're kind of like a plumber. You show up with a truck full of tools, and a big part of being a great session player is understanding what someone means when they use a particular term. A lot of times you'll have five different people say the same word, and often they mean different things by it. And they're afraid that they're going to tell you to do the thing that you do all the time, when they're really looking for something new and exciting. Everybody wants to have an involuntary emotional reaction to what you're playing.
So in having the ability to be of service, but also to provide something new and exciting as an artist that's a musician, early in your life, where did you start to get an education on music to be able to have the ability to understand how to do that?
When I really got into music and I was reading CD booklets, or with my dad's records, I would see certain names showing up over and over again on guitar or whatever. And I was like, wait a minute, this guy's not playing in that band, why is he just on the records? And I sort of stumbled into this hidden world, of session playing. Like, there's people that you can pay just to play on your records. I saw it as a way to make a career without having to be like a touring guy that's part of a band trying to go for the, whole rock and roll lifestyle or whatever. Like, I could plant myself somewhere and play in the studio.
When was the first time that you had your guitar recorded?
Oh gosh, there's some projects that I did back in Kansas that I still pray no one ever hears. Like recording on someone's 4-track in their bedroom, and then we vomited that tape all over campus or something, There was a studio that I worked at that was in rural Kansas, and there would be just every once in a while some aspiring songwriter would want to cut a few songs, and this guy that ran the studio would hire me.
When you think back on those early sessions, so let's say the one that, where you're hired in the studio, were there any things that you wish that your older self could go back and tell yourself now that you would have known that would have helped you in that process and the first time that somebody hired you for something?
Oh yeah, lots, too much. The biggest thing would be, it's not all about you. You don't need to single-handedly make the song great. This isn't a guitar feature. This is someone else's song, and you need to serve that. I had the art side of it down, but I didn't have the service industry side of it down. It's like, I need to make this cool. And the way I make things cool is by playing cool stuff on guitar. So I have to do a lot of that, a different set of 10,000 hours. They talk about, like, if you want to be really good at an instrument or good at a sport or some kind of martial art or something,
right,
10,000 hour rule. Well, session playing's a different 10,000 hours than learning your instrument and becoming competent on it in various styles. It's a slow process, but that's a good thing,
Yeah, that's an incredible point and a great perspective to understand that it's not just about the instrument, but also about that experience of how you're utilizing the instrument as a tool in that specific type of scenario.
Yeah.
Were there any epiphany, like, kind of moments that you had in those early days of figuring that out about exactly how to do that? Like, how to take your mind into more of a service standpoint, or did it just become kind of more aware over time?
I did the same thing that a lot of young guitar players do. They come in, they're doing something cool that people like, and they really want to make their mark. So they might overplay a little bit. They might play a little flashier than they would when they've got some years behind them. The process of learning to listen, I think that's the most critical aspect of our job. Mm-hmm. And that process is a bit slower. Was slower for me. I approached everything like, I got to justify why I'm here. That means I play a lot of notes on the guitar. And, right, for people who liked what I did, it was great.
So after you started getting those first experiences of hanging out with your buddies in their bedroom with a 4-track and then working at that studio, what was your thought about what your maybe initial step would be into starting a professional career?
I played for years throughout college doing that kind of stuff, recording with friends, playing in local bands, and I never thought that it would be a career. I was in the math program at Kansas State University, and I was finishing my bachelor's degree, and I met this girl, didn't know what I wanted to do, kind of wanted to stick around and see what would happen there. And my professors were all wanting me to get a master's degree. They're like, you should stay and go to grad school. We'd pay you to teach. Well, I was engaged to this girl by this time. And I told her, I was like, I think I have to try to play music. I have to at least try. I don't want to be 40 sitting in my little math office having wondered for 15, 20 years if I could have done something. I need to know. I just need to know. We moved to Nashville in 2006. I was an active member of some guitar and music and recording forums, and I met a couple guys in town through that I was able to sort of pick their brain via private messaging on those forums. And I got a couple of tips, and so I moved to town with a few guitars. And
so when you made that decision, was it still in your mind that like math is a backup plan, or were you just saying, I'm going to go and like figure this out? Where was your mindset at? Like, did you have a timeline on how long you were going to give yourself to make it happen, whatever that meant for you?
I had heard that Nashville was a 5-year town, like give it 5 years. I was refusing to look at it as if I had a backup plan. I felt like having that mindset wouldn't give me the urgency to push forward. You know, it's like, oh, I can always fall back on this. I can always do this.
Which is very interesting because you had a degree a master's in mathematics where you could probably pretty easily have a really great fallback plan to have a job, but it wasn't something that you loved. And so even though you had that like as a viable option in your mind, you knew that in order to pursue this type of very competitive, creative field, you sort of had to be all or nothing into it in order to do that.
Yeah.
That's
even
amazing.
just the way I think about it. If I get in a freak accident and lose one of my hands, like, yeah, I'll go teach math, but it's not an option right now. Right now is in 5 years, is this working?
So what was the first step?
In the beginning, it happens a lot slower than you want it to.
Right.
But that's a good thing. In the beginning, you don't have the experience. You don't have those 10,000 hours. You're not going to make a great impression on somebody who's a living legend, you know, for the rest of us in your early days. So trust the process. It's slower than you want, but that's a good thing.
Right.
Know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not a blessing if the blessing comes too early.
Started going to every show I could. I remember going to one early on, and I was standing in the back of the room. This was at Blue Bar off of Division. This artist had just come down off the stage, and she was standing right in front of me. And I was just watching, just hanging out. Well, the guitar player comes down, and he had a voicemail from his tour manager. The following week, his bus was going to have to leave like 5 hours earlier than he thought, so he wasn't able to make the gig. And he's like, I'm really sorry. I can help you find somebody if you need. And she's like, oh, that's okay. I'll take care of it. And he walks away, and I can see from behind, she just kind of goes and mutters something under her breath. And I'm kind of like, excuse me. I literally tapped her on the shoulder. I was like, I know you don't know me. I saw that whole thing. I would love to help you out. I'm sure you got people you want to call if they can't make it. Whatever it was, whether she didn't want to deal with it or actually didn't seem like a total weirdo, she decided to take a chance on me. And so she got my email address. She sent me a couple songs, and she and her acoustic guitar player came to my place and auditioned me. So that led to other gigs. It was like every time I played, somebody would come up to the stage and like, hey, I don't know you. You sounded really great. Can I get your phone number or email?
So would you say that after those initial gigs where you found yourself on stage after the show, someone comes up and says, hey, I imagine that you've also seen, you know, we've seen being around here long enough that doesn't necessarily happen to every guitar player. When you look back, are there any things that by the way that you carried yourself, by the way that you played, how you approached things that you felt like might have led to that consistency of people coming up and wanting to get your information because of that?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's often so much about things other than your playing. Are you on time? Do you know everything that you were asked to learn when you show up to a gig? How do you carry yourself? Are you a complainer? Are you the kind of person who's going to get everybody else thinking like, well, yeah, this kind of does suck. You know, I should have been paid $25 more for this gig or something. Mm-hmm. Rob McNally told me early on. I was complaining about some gig I had to him. And he's like, man, I've been in so many of these situations. Your mindset needs to be, I'm going to play as best as I can, no matter what situation someone hires me for. You can't get resentful that people call you. even if you go into the situation and you're like, man, this person can't sing, they're way out of a paper bag, or this drummer's pocket's awful and this is hard. Your only responsibility is to do what you were asked to do to the best of your ability.
Now that becomes a little more challenging, I guess, to continue to do the more successful that you get. Are there any things that you've done throughout your career to keep in the mindset of that?
Yeah, when someone wants to pay me money to do something I love to do, I'm going to do the absolute best that I can and not try to get by on anything else, any other aspect. For me, it's just, I just try to do as well as I can every single time. Because these things live forever.
Right.
You know, you have an off day and you're like, I'll let that slide. I'll let that slide, whatever. You've got to be your own policeman for sure.
Was there any type of like ear training or listening or focus that you gave when you were just either casually or critically listening to other records that are out there as an education to start to figure out how you interact with other instruments and how you find a way to create a stamp but without getting in the way, and those principles that you started to learn? I
started practicing for what my job was going to be. When you think of practicing the guitar, you think like, well, I'm going to play some scales or play to a metronome or learn this solo that I really like. Like, I started learning records, figuring out every part, listening to it in context. How does this work with the other parts? Why do I like it so much? Here's something that I'm hearing that on paper, according to the music theory that I know, is wrong. Why is it so cool?
Yeah.
It's because you learn all the rules and then you realize there aren't any. And it's all just about what sounds good to everyone, right? There were a lot of records that I wrote number charts for the whole thing and then learned every single guitar part. When I was on the road and I had made the decision to not go back out on the road, I would pick like a corner of the green room and go sit with my headphones on, plugged into my little iRig on my phone, and learn these parts. I remember I did John Mayer's Born and Raised. Mm-hmm. Great guitar record. There's great acoustic playing. There's great electric playing. The feel is all great. It's not over the top. Good songs. Mm-hmm. And I remember learning that whole thing. You're learning the things that you like, the things that give you that emotional reaction that you are hoping to pass on to other people when you play for them. Everybody's looking for an involuntary emotional reaction. Oh, that makes me feel the thing. That's what I'm looking for. That's great. I think you get there by listening to records that give you that. Anytime people ask me, what do I do? Or how do you go from being a guitar player to a session musician? For me, it's just learning records. Learn records. And this is as much an ear training thing as it is getting it under your fingers. If you play along with it and something doesn't match, you're going to notice. Figure it out till it matches. Right. Even the timing of everything, and then the things that really stick with you from that become part of your toolbox. I became really a lot more aware of rhythm guitar. Guitar players aren't really, as a species, are not aware of rhythm guitar. You know, and that is your bread and butter for sure. It's just got to feel good. It's got to be supportive. I remember seeing this clip of Faith Hill on, I think, the Letterman show. She was performing a song called Stronger, and a lot of my heroes were in the band. Jerry McPherson and Pat Buchanan were playing electric guitar. Tom Bukovac was playing acoustic. And the whole performance opened up with Tom strumming an open C chord. And it was just like, why does that sound different than 99.99999% of people strumming an open C chord? It's just an open position C chord, right? But the feel and the vibe makes it really compelling. It draws you in. It's like, okay, I want that. So I would track myself and then I would listen back to it. Okay, that feels good. That feels good. That beat feels weird. Zoom in. Oh, I'm ahead of the grid. And that's a hard thing for guitar players to learn, but there's real value in learning how to relax your entire body. That's something that I've very much focused intentionally on in the way that I play, how I carry tension when I'm playing, whether I lock up my elbow or my wrist or something when I was younger and to get excited. I would find that when I was playing something difficult, I'd press my tongue against the roof of my mouth. And so my underneath my jaw where your tongue sits, it would be sore. And that's tension. I'm holding tension, and it affects the rest of my body. Sometimes I would take my foot and lock my calf up and have my foot on my tiptoes while I'm sitting there. That's tension. Sometimes it'd be in my neck, or like I said, in my shoulder, my arm, on my picking hand.
And are there moments where that tension can be good?
Yeah, that's the thing. We're talking about rules that ultimately you obey them or not. It doesn't matter. It's like what feels good. There are times when we get asked to be the angsty young, I want you to sound like you just discovered music. Yeah. And you're this excited kid playing in front of your mirror in the bedroom. It's like, man, I did that for years. Why don't I want to go back to that? But yeah, you try to sound like you didn't practice as much. Give me the emotional response that I'm looking for with an urgency in your playing, a youthful urgency.
For every example of something that someone says, this is how it's done, there's another dozen examples of how it's done a different way.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a lot of experimentation, like you're talking about, to be able to discover all the different possibilities. Where did some of those first experiences come for you to get into a professional Nashville session with other great players?
I remember my wife and I, our goal was to have a year's worth of bills in the bank when I got off the road. We'd just had our first kid. The artist I was playing with just had a number one. And so I think I played 120 shows or something like that year, which is crazy. So had a bunch of money in the bank. First of all, I started taking people out to breakfast. Hey man, we should catch up. I'm in town. Oh, by the way, I'm in town, for real. Right. I'm not going back out on the road. I just do sessions now. And I might have 1 or 2 that month. But, again, that's the mindset. The fallback option is not there. Equivocating about what you're doing. This is what I do. Even if I have 1 or 2 a month, I'm still out in my studio every day trying to figure out the right spot for this 57 and this Royer in front of my cab, trying different pre's out, playing different guitars and amps, and finding what combinations inspire me. Inspired Justin is going to give more value, in a session setting. So early on, it was a lot of last minute, hey, somebody overslept, or we totally forgot to book an acoustic player, and our 3 people that we like are booked. Can you get to Sound Emporium in 20 minutes? I'm like, yeah, I'm in the car, and right. I would throw as much as I could in the car and go. Try to be a part of a whole rather than here's my chance to audition for everybody.
What were some of the things that you learned through paying attention to that environment that would help you get called back again?
As a guitar player in particular, you need to be hyper aware of your tuning. You don't want to be the person that the engineer has to say, hey, would you check your tuning? Would you check your tuning? If they're asking you that a few times, you need to take your guitar somewhere, and maybe your strings are too old. Maybe it needs to be set up, but especially today where so much of what we're playing alongside is software based and the intonation is perfect, your tuning's got to be on.
Right.
And the second thing is your pocket. These are the things that organize noise into music, right? Timing and pitch. Right. You need to be hyper aware.
Were there any exercises that you did for yourself early on to get tighter with your pocket and be able to jump between different grooves easily?
Releasing tension, intentionally finding out where am I carrying tension. I've been practicing this solo. Why is my tongue sore? Well, I'm smashing it against the roof of my mouth as I'm trying to figure it out. Let go of that, That's absolutely the biggest thing. I think a lot of people try to play behind the beat by anticipating the beat and then flamming it. That always sounds freaking terrible. You can't do that. Playing behind the beat is not something that you need to try to time and subdivide a response to. It's literally just relaxing. Just get rid of all the tension. Even in a higher tempo song, even in a part that has energy, it needs to sit right. We talked about it being a really slow process early on.
Right.
If you are struggling with, your guitars aren't set up, or you don't have the greatest pocket, you're pretty good, but you don't have the tightest pocket, you might not want to get in a room with like a big time producer who's going to immediately, oh, well, he's not ready.
So I guess in thinking about that, there's a lot of value in sort of playing to your weaknesses, like understanding the things that you could improve upon, and then making that the things that you're working on when you're preparing for the opportunities that will come in the future to get on to those bigger sessions.
That's a huge thing. That's a great thought. Too many people practice their strengths. It makes you feel good. Mm-hmm. I'm good at this. Oh, so cool. You're doing nothing to improve your weaknesses. So being really aware, having the ears to hear. Again, when you're learning records, man, my run in this solo doesn't sound the same as that. Why not? Back it up and play it again. Back it up and play it again. I couldn't play slide to save my life early on. And now I'm known as a slide guy, you know?
I was gonna say, that's a very surprising thing to hear you say.
Oh, dude. Well, when I was on this gig, the David Nail gig. And at the time we had a pedal steel player, this guy, Abe Stoklasa, who's an amazing musician. And he ended up going to some other gig. And I remember saying something, I don't know, I was just trying to take the sting off of his departure because the artist, David, was bummed about it, you know. It's like, man, I'll pick up some of those parts on slide. And it was one of those things, like as soon as it escapes your mouth, you're like, I don't know if I should have said that. So that's immediately what all my practice became. Mm-hmm. And I would practice it at sound check. And David's one of the most amazing singers I've ever worked with. And I remember there were certain sound checks early on where I'd kind of be playing a slide part and he'd go, flat, flat, that's also flat, sharp, you know, and I'm like, yeah, I'm trying, you know. I suck at this and I offered to do it. So how do I get awesome? There's no secret. It's just hours.
What are some of the things that you started to learn about that you needed to listen to in the other instruments?
That's the most important part of what we do is listening. You can't just hear a song at when you're all listening down in the control room. You can't just say like, oh, key of E, got my key of E licks, you know. Oh, it's about this tempo. That's good because I can do this thing there. First of all, I have to play a bunch of parts. Typically, it's at least two tracks, unless we're going for some like we want this to sound like a band, like a live thing. Mm-hmm. You know, you be the guy or whatever. I'm playing at least 2 tracks, probably a solo on a third, if not a whole third pass. Often when we leave the control room, I have an idea for an intro part. If it's going to be on guitar, if there even is one. Some songs, you know, it's like, well, we'll just have acoustic through the first verse and then people will trickle in. Mm-hmm. But I'll have an idea for a hook or a melody. That falls on electric guitar players a lot.
Where do those ideas come from when you're thinking about a sig part or a guitar lick?
If you don't have anything that jumps out in your mind, the chorus melody is a good option to start with. Sometimes that's what they want, you know. That's a very popular intro part is foreshadowing the chorus melody of the vocal.
Right. And how do you do that? Because you don't play the note for note the chorus melody.
Yeah. So you kind of guitarify it. How can I phrase that on guitar that has the energy that we need? So I typically start with melodic information. I don't want to start just playing diamonds and then the song develops around me without me contributing. Like we were talking about earlier, that first pass where you've got an idea. Well, I'm going to try this. You know, you might talk to if there's another electric guy, y'all are going to have a little powwow before you start each song. Mm-hmm. Hey, what were you thinking? Well, man, I was going to grab a baritone and play a big old wide tremolo part. Okay, I'll stay higher, you know? Right. Or do you have an idea for the intro? Because I was thinking of this rhythmic thing that kind of goes, you know, that kind of goes through the whole track. Okay, cool. Maybe I'll try a sig lick or something. But there are other instruments that live in your bandwidth as well, right? The acoustic guitar got all the same notes that you do. So there's somebody you need to be listening to. Keyboard goes higher and lower than you, and it is often writing that same information. And often keyboard players are thinking like guitar players. They're putting effects on that are rhythmic or distortion or fuzz, you know, and they become another guitar player. Mm-hmm. Some guys are really great at that, like David Dorn is great at playing cool guitar parts on keys, you know, as a keyboard player, not trying to fake guitar sounds, but
are you adjusting your tonality or your guitar choice or your pickup choice to find space between that? How do you start to listen for the sonics of how to, because a lot of things, if everyone just kind of plays in the same register and the same voicing, then it just sounds like a bunch of kind of the same thing in there, and it doesn't have a lot of depth and width to it. And that's something that I notice with younger bands that get in the studio for the first time, and they're kind of all just sort of like playing the one chord voicing that they know, and they're all doing it the same way. And but then you get the session guys in there that have this understanding and experience of how different sounds work together to create a wider sort of thing. And all of a sudden it's like they could be playing the same chord progression, but it has so much space and, and spread to it. So what do you listen for in order to be able to find your space and support the other elements?
The kind of song that it is going to determine that a lot, but also the choices that other people are making. Like if the keyboard player is starting off with a some sort of rhythmic kind of distorted, fuzzed out thing, and it's thicker, I'm going to stay away from that. We don't need two guys who aren't bass guitar being really dark and thick tones, right? And sometimes it's not even just tones, it's parts. Like everybody listening in the control room has made whether it's conscious or not, has made a mental note of a breath in the phrasing in the chorus. Like, ooh, there's a spot that we can do something. And so we try that on our first pass. Well, maybe the keyboard player and I each try something that's a little different from each other. Sometimes it's like, man, I really like what you're doing. I'm going to jump on that with you. I'll play it an octave under you. If my guitar sound is more lower mid-range power, rather than higher and brighter, maybe I'll play it lower to stay in that vibe of my track. But if I'm playing higher and it's ambient, then I'll play that line in my higher ambient space, but share the melody with the keyboard, or the acoustic or the bass or whatever band licks we come up with. There's spots that everybody's listening for. Like the vocal's the king or queen, right? Everything is subordinate to that. Everything is being played with the goal of supporting it and helping it stand on its own 2 feet. And like I said earlier, taking a song that when it's just vocal and guitar can sound like a lot of other songs, but how do we give it its own identity?
So as you become comfortable with figuring that out, as far as like the part to play, how do you stay fresh with your tones and in some cases your part or your hook, your hook part, so you don't end up playing kind of the same thing on everything? Because we all have our own go-tos, that we're just like our natural internal rhythm that we might fall into. What sort of things do you work on in order to be able to stay fresh?
If you get too tied to a certain pedal that gives you a certain effect, don't take it to the next session. Don't do it at all. I got so inspired by the simplicity of JT's sounds that I stopped bringing a pedal board to sessions for a while until it started freaking people out. Just visually, they were like, why is the floor blank in front of you? How are you going to give me what I need out of you without that?
Yeah, where's all your
Just
stuff?
Listen with these, If you have one guitar you grab for slide because it's easy the way that it's set up for you to play slide, then you've got one voice for that technique, right? For me, again, going back to learning slide and like really working on my weaknesses, would practice it on the guitars with the lowest action, with the lightest tension. I wanted to be able to play it on anything I grabbed. I don't have, let me grab my slide guitar. I didn't want to do that. There are nearly infinite ways to challenge yourself. You can't sound like you're burned out because that's going to come through in your playing. That's going to come through on somebody else's record. People are going to notice that you're kind of checked out. While you may not be excited about music in the exact same way you were when you were discovering it, man, there's like, again, nearly infinitely many records out there and other players to listen to, not even guitar players. Some of my favorite musicians don't even play guitar. I just think they're incredible, like pedal steel guys, B3 players. If you're around long enough, what you started out doing might come back again later on,
Right.
Like right now, like 90s country, whole George Strait, early Tim McGraw,
Right.
Outlaw stuff has come back around.
Mm-hmm.
So brush up on your vocabulary, keep at it and keep keep going after the things that you're weak on, or the things that you don't really do. Like, I don't really play this kind of music very well, or I'm not known as that guy. Make yourself known as that guy. Don't make people think that they're settling when they hire you for a certain thing because they got down a list to where you are. Be thankful you're on the list and deliver.
That brings up an interesting point about identity. Something that comes up a lot. Your identity may be different to different people. One producer has a way that they look at you, oftentimes because of the experience that they may have had the first time that they worked with you, or the reason that you were recommended to them. Artists may be, the same way. I feel like as fellow musicians and peers, you guys all see each other's abilities, beyond the scope of one thing for most people. Some people get pulled into that. But how did you end up balancing the line between being known for something, or like as the guy for something, to be able to provide your valuable identity to the market, place, versus being known as someone that's very versatile? And what do you think the pros and cons are to those two things?
Early on, you get a buzz around you as like, hey, have you tried this guy? He's new. He's got this thing. It's cool. You might give him a call. And so you do the thing that you get called for all the time. You also need to be practicing and learning other things. I remember early on when I was on the road with Terry Clark, before I was on the road, my first rehearsal, we were working on all her set, and a lot of her hits were from the 90s. A lot of it was Brent Mason or Stuart Smith or Kenny Greenberg on electric. And I remember our first break in rehearsal, pedal steel player, who was the band leader at the time, he was like, hey man, you going to get that solo? I was like, on the last song we just did? He goes, yeah, you're going to get that solo, right? I was like, well, I played a solo. Was something wrong with it? And he's like, no, you're going to learn the one off the record note for note, right? Like, he didn't understand like why I didn't understand what he was talking about. Uh-huh. And I go, yeah, of course. Yes, I will. I didn't know that was the thing, I mean, again, I didn't know anybody. I was just sort of pushing my way toward this thing that I'm figuring out as I'm doing, And man, I went home and shedded. I mean, just locked myself in the room.
As you start to recognize that there's certain things that you might not be known for, you start to work on those things. How do you sort of let people know, hey, I can do this thing too? Is there any way to be intentional about that? Or do you just have to be prepared when the opportunity strikes?
I'm awkward with self-promotion. I just don't, it's not me. And so it feels disingenuous, like inauthentic. So I try to not do it. Mm-hmm. I think early on I was not known as a country guy. I was a vibe guy and a rock guy. And then the slide thing became sort of what tied me into a rootsier thing that people would put me into. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't like the telly picker, right? Get a telly, start playing, start learning that old stuff, mm-hmm. And become one of those guys. Like, yeah. Again, you don't want people to think like, well, we've got 5 songs. He'll do great on 4 of them. Yeah. But the one traditional one is going to kind of suffer, Mm-hmm. So, and
then over time you build those skills, and then just through the process of just playing on sessions, people start to get that experience of, oh yeah, he really can do, he's great at this thing too. And then your perception of the people's perception of you can start to shift based on your ability to execute that. I guess, is that how you see that play out?
Yeah. And maybe early on you only have a few things that you do on one of those kinds of songs that's not typically your bag. But the more you practice and the more of those mm-hmm. phrases and techniques and little idioms of that style that you appropriate, your skill set grows, your tool bag that you're bringing grows.
Do you think that it's possible to have a career as a session player by being known to like be like the one thing or whatever? Or is it more valuable to have those different skills, or a personal preference?
I think as a session player, it's definitely more valuable to have all those skills, while fully understanding that my favorite guitar players that got me into playing guitar and that I listened to all throughout my teenage and college years and after, they're all artists with a singular voice. Like, I'm not going to make records and then go tour in support of them, I'm going to play on other people's records. Well, I need to be able to play on as many different records as possible to piece this together,
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I didn't understand when I first moved to town. I had this idea that job security meant having 3 or 4 months worth of dates on the calendar with one artist. It's like, okay, hey, I'm going to make this for June, this for July, this for August, and so on. And hey, this is going to be a great season,
Uh-huh.
You can get fired at any time. And it usually doesn't have anything to do with your playing. It just might be, my buddy moved back to town, or somebody said I should try somebody else. Or if that goes away, you got nothing. Versus if you play in town and you're playing for different songwriter clients, you might have 25, 30 clients, 50 clients. And if somebody stops calling you, unless they called you all the time, do you really notice? Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
Because other people are trying you out. You move into other camps. You come out of camps. The only guarantee about any gig that you have is that it's going to end. And I'm
just like life.
Yeah. Hey, man, we're all going to die. Having all these accounts that I work for far fewer times makes a lot more sense to me,
Yeah, and that's where the versatility comes into play. To
expanding your skill set. Yeah, so you're a viable call.
We talked a little earlier about how people describe things and how the vocabulary about how people describe sound or intention or emotion and stuff can vary so greatly between different people.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any things that you did in order to expedite that process of learning all of these different languages?
In the moment, in the room, when they're asking you to do something, like, I need more energy out of that part. It's like, okay, what does that mean? Like more subdivisions, a heavier right hand. And so you try a few things and you get it from them, and then you file that away. When that person says this, they mean this. When somebody else says that, they mean this. Again, it's another one of those 10,000 hours, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you are interpreting and figuring out what they mean. The thing to remember, you can't get down on yourself for not guessing the first time correctly. Because sometimes it's like, man, what in the world is he talking about?
Uh-huh.
And the whole movement of the session is like, there's not room for me to like really parse out. So I'm going to go for something, and if it's not right, they're going to tell me. And you got to remember that you're all on the hunt together. They don't need you to come up with every single thing. Often they need better hands to play their ideas. You develop a sense for what people mean by certain words.
How do you keep ego in check when you become someone that has great respect for their instrument, their ability? You got some success under your belt, and then you're having trouble translating, communicating. You're trying these different things that don't seem to be really hitting the control room in the way that they want, but they can't really tell you exactly how they want, or everything feels like, man, this was a perfect take, and then the artist is like, eh.
And it never happens. This was hard for me for a while early on. Like I had my sense of identity so wrapped in what I do. When it's a success, you feel like people like you. But when something's not working, you feel like they don't like you, which is not true. There has to be a place that you can go to where, in your own mind, in your own heart, where your identity doesn't rest on how people respond to you. You can't think, oh, they hate me because they didn't like this solo that I played, that I thought that I just cut my own heart out and offered it to them, And they're like, what else you got? Sometimes you're in the studio with an artist who just had their first number one, and they're trying to recreate that same situation. They're nervous, labels breathing down their neck, They've cut some other stuff. Whoever at the label doesn't think that we have the next single yet. And so they're kind of bringing a nervous energy. That stuff can't affect you, really. And you can't get it in your head that people don't like you when they reject a part you played. That's harder to do than it sounds, especially early on,
Absolutely. And with how challenging that is, how do you do that?
Separating your identity from your guitar. The more that you can recognize it in the moment, like, I'm responding emotionally. You're starting to feel like the guy hates you. He doesn't hate you. Calm down. Listen to what he's saying. You know, he might be a little flippant with how he's tossing words around. That's okay. He's not talking about you as a person. We're all on the hunt together.
So kind of, and you've said that a few times, it kind of feels like sort of like a motto that you would go to in that moment, you know, to kind of center yourself again, you know, and then you're just saying that the more that you've done that over the years, the more that it builds in this internal separation, you know, between that, and then it becomes something that's more second nature and just built in.
Yeah.
As things start to take off in your career and you start getting more calls, and you're staying busy. So you mentioned before, if you didn't have a session, you're just in your studio practicing, working on things, working on technique. How do you start to balance work, practice, and life as the career starts to grow?
The session scene here, which you know, runs on a 10, 2, and 6 schedule, right? So typically you have 10 to 1, 2 to 5, and 6 to 9 p.m. sessions.
Mm-hmm.
And so your work week can look like any combination of those 15 slots being booked. For me, I've got a family, so I'm not going to be practicing in the evenings when my kids are home, you know, and we're doing family stuff. But say I've got a day where I've just got a 2 o'clock. Well, I can put a record on, play along with it. I can work on some technique that I think needs work. I'm doing a lot of the overdubs that I get. I'm doing them first thing in the morning. I'm up and recording by 7 o'clock, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I can get a couple songs done before I leave for the day.
Mm-hmm.
If it's like a demo, you know. Mm-hmm. There's value to just playing for your own enjoyment, because you can get really burned out feeling like you just don't get to do that anymore. Like, everything I do has this deadline, you know. People send me something and like, are you done yet? You know?
Right.
Oh man, that's all of our favorite thing when someone's like, man, I need this back up. Can you get it done in like 2 days? Can you get it done tomorrow maybe? Yeah, I guess I'll bust my ass to make that happen. And then you send the files back. Thanks, man. And then a week later, hey, can you re-upload those files? Because the link expired. I'm like,
yeah.
So
yeah, that's good advice to people that are hiring session players. Do not do that.
Playing for your own enjoyment is a big deal. Creating something. I've actually written a couple of instrumental pieces that I have sketches of in my Pro Tools.
Mm-hmm. In the past number of years, remote recording has become a big part of the career of a session player.
Yeah.
And it's something that you do quite a bit on electric guitar, acoustic guitar, multiple instruments. Is that something that you sort of intentionally prepared yourself for? Is it something that you started to get asked for? What was your process for getting into having a solidified setup for remote recording, and how do you fit it into your workload with actual sessions?
Man, I remember I moved to town with a 1999 black Jeep Cherokee Sport that I loved. I felt like I could go anywhere in this vehicle, you know. And I sold it to buy recording gear because my dad offered to give me an 89 Honda Accord with like 300,000 miles on it. It's like, hey, free car, I can sell this and put it into an M-Box rig or something, you know. So I just thought I should work on this thing that I ultimately want to wind up doing. That is how my session career started. When I got off the road and told people, hey, I'm doing sessions now, they weren't all of a sudden going to put me at the top of their list for calling the band, but I was in their mind when it came time to do some overdubs, mm-hmm. or maybe play a different solo or try a different hook because they didn't go through all their ideas on the tracking date. So it's always been very tied to home recording for me, you know. Mm-hmm. When I got off the road in like spring of 2013, I think is when I did not go back out. I spent the year before playing a ton of shows, but I also turned my detached one-car garage into a studio. Like, it was made out of cinder blocks with a wooden roof. I had a block mason come out and brick up the front door, the windows. I had one door. I had some walls that weren't exactly parallel. I did double drywall and green glue, and I vaulted the ceiling of the control room, and I had a mini split AC, and there were so many little projects to create this like lab where I could go experiment with what I wanted to be able to offer.
So when you were first setting up that studio, aside from the physical space, which I think is a really important aspect that you mentioned, if someone's looking to, okay, I want to get into playing on sessions, I want to be able to record from home at a, at a high level, what sort of entry level pieces of equipment are important, and are there any ones that you've found that you just absolutely love?
An Apollo Twin is really great for me. I've got the Thunderbolt version, the USB-C version, and I bought some plugins when I first got it. I never use any of them. I like to get a really good sound out of my guitar or out of my speaker, do as little to it as I can. So I have a couple preamps that I really like. My favorite is a Chandler TG2. I really like Chandler's stuff.
Yeah, me too.
I'm using a Heil PR30, which is basically kind of a fatter, more aggressive 57. A 57's great. If you can't get a good sound with a 57, that's a weakness. That's what you need to work on. Right. I just focus on giving really good parts and having a great source. Whatever the mic is in front of needs to be awesome. That's my side of it.
We can very quickly get lost in that rabbit hole of gear. And if I only had this preamp, or if I only had this pedal or this microphone, then everything would be better.
Exactly.
But there's so much of it starts at the source. In your process with dealing with a client remotely, how do you approach that? It's a little different than being in person with someone and being able to have that direct back-to-back, feedback. What do you do to prepare yourself to be able to kind of get inside their head without them being there to actually give you that feedback in real time?
I'll tend to over-deliver on options, on things like, here's one option for an intro hook, or here's the solo could go a couple different ways. Give options where you aren't sure what exactly is going to work. Or if you hear multiple ideas even. Man, I very, very rarely have people come back and say, oh, I was kind of hearing this. And there's a few people that's just part of their process. I know that what I send first and maybe even second isn't going to completely do it, because part of their process is hearing what I did and having another idea based on how they heard what I sent, and that's fine. I'm going to do whatever helps get them to their goal.
For you to understand why that's happening, and for you to understand that that's part of someone's process, I'm sure it makes it so much easier to be able to manage that, because then you sort of have that expectation already and you're prepared for it. And then, cool, yeah, we'll do that. And there's less of that opportunity, even if it's accidental, to have an attitude or to come back with oh, really? Or, or just to get burnt out on the process. But just by being aware of it, that's a really great point to anticipate how someone might respond in order to keep the right mindset.
I'm going to make sure that you have what you need, whether that means I've given you more or not. I don't want to give you less. That's the thing.
So at this point in your career, the multiples of 10,000 hours of different types of skills that you've worked through, what are the things that keep you excited to get up and go to work every day?
It all comes down to the song. Really, most of the time somebody thinks you're amazing, it's because the song was amazing and you just played the right simple thing that it needed. I had a conversation with a couple of older guys who have been doing this for decades longer than me. We went to lunch together and I was like, man, when I started doing this and there was this 1, 5, 6 minor, 4 push feel kind of thing happening. It's I didn't think that we'd still be doing it in 2022. I asked him, I was like, how do you stay fresh on this stuff? He's like, that didn't start in 2014. That thing started in 99. I've been doing it since then, Whatever you see over and over again, it's not your concern. You can't control the feel and the chord progression you're given to play on. So worry about what you can worry about. How can you own it? You want to be the guy that just completely destroys that, it just sounds... What you're doing sounds so good and so fresh, even though you've played on a song that has that feel at that tempo.
Yeah, 2 hours ago.
2 hours ago and 20 years ago.
When you look forward into your career, what do you think will allow you to continue to have longevity to be able to keep doing this as long as you want to?
I've had older players give me advice and encouragement along the way. I've had one player tell me that I was doing everything right. Just keep doing what you're doing. And I hadn't shot up to this super gotta have him on everything. It's been a slow burn. for me, very slow burn. I still don't feel like I've peaked, you know? That's a good feeling. I mean, I know guys who are in my generation who went mega fast and became the dude on everything. And then his concern becomes, how do I manage the descent? As a player, you can only keep doing that as long as you can, you know? Mm-hmm. Or you can get into other things. You can start producing yourself. You can start writing. The wearing multiple hats thing is coming to our side of the glass as well. Like I have a couple friends that I write stuff together for music libraries. I have stuff that I do on that front. I produce with those same guys. You just have other irons in the fire. And it's all music, so it's all cool. That keeps things fresh too. The more you have a few different hats that you're putting on.
So it sounds like that longevity comes from recognizing that things that this industry has been and will continue to be a consistent thing of a cycle. We're going to go through like these peaks and flows. There's trends that are going to become popular and unpopular. And as long as you can navigate it with versatility, with looking for a variety of different ways to utilize the tools and skills that you've developed to be valuable to others, then you'll find a place, you know, within that.
I told you when I was still in Kansas and I had made the decision to try to play music for a living that I was sort of messaging some of these guys online back and forth. I remember I was teaching a class and my phone rang. I looked at it and it was a 615 number. I'm like, 615, I think that's Nashville. So I ran outside of the building. My class was like doing homework or something. I ran outside the building. I answered it. I was like, hey. And it was one of the guys that I'd been talking to. It was Michael Britt from Lone Star. Lone Star's guitar player, right? Great guitar player. And he just wanted to encourage me. He's like, man, we've never met. You sent me a message with your phone number, you know, saying we should hang when you get to town. He's like, I just wanted to tell you, you seem like you really have your head on your shoulders. Well, you're asking all the right questions. He's like, this town is full of good guitar players, but there's always room for one more great one. I did not take that to mean one more like super shredder. Like there are people who can play circles around me, you know. I've come up with parts to play on people's songs. That's my thing. I help bring songs to life and stand on their own two legs. And I think that's what he meant. You know, there's room for people who have that focus and do that well. That's how it's worked out for me. So
it's been so great to get to know more about your story and background. We've had the pleasure of working together for years. Yeah. But just to be able to sit down and learn more about where all your genius, is derived from is great. If I ever need a math tutor, I'll
got any problems?
You a call.
Yeah, man. Let's do it. It's funny. Like I have friends now whose kids need help and they're like, can he send you a math problem? Can you show him what to do? And it's like, yeah, I'll dust that off. Why not?
That's great, man. Well, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
All right.